The Stockholm Heist, the crime that created Stockholm Syndrome. In August 1973, a seemingly routine bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, spiraled into one of the most psychologically fascinating hostage situations in modern criminal history. It didn't just leave an imprint on Swedish law enforcement or banking security, it reshaped psychology itself. This event led to the coining of a term now used worldwide, Stockholm Syndrome. The robbery begins. It all began on the morning of August 23, 1973. A convicted felon named Jan Erik Olsson, who was on furlough from prison, walked into the Kreditbanken at Norrmalmstorg Square in central Stockholm. Dressed in a wig and dark sunglasses, and armed with a submachine gun, he fired a shot into the ceiling and shouted in English, "The party has just begun." Inside the bank, panic erupted. Olsson took 4 bank employees, 3 women and 1 man, hostage. His demands were bold. He wanted his friend and fellow criminal Clark Olofsson released from prison, 3 million Swedish kroner, weapons, bulletproof vests, and a getaway car. To everyone's surprise, Swedish authorities met part of his demands. They brought Clark Olofsson to the bank, hoping he could help negotiate with Olsson. But instead of diffusing the situation, Olofsson became a willing participant. Over the course of 6 tense days, the 2 criminals worked together, holding the hostages inside the bank's vault. An unusual bond forms. What shocked both police and the public was the reaction of the hostages. Instead of showing fear or hatred toward their captors, the hostages began to identify with them. They resisted rescue efforts, refused to testify against the criminals afterward, and even expressed concern for their captors' well-being. One of the hostages, Kristin and Mark, famously told the Swedish Prime Minister over the phone that she feared the police more than the robbers. She and others described how Olsson and Olofsson treated them kindly, offered emotional comfort, and protected them from perceived threats, especially the threat of violent intervention by the police. Resolution without bloodshed. After 6 days, on August 28, tear gas was pumped into the vault through a hole drilled by police. The hostages were finally released, physically unharmed. Olsson surrendered first, followed by Olofsson. The ordeal had lasted 131 hours. The hostages emerged from the vault with surprising sentiments. They hugged their captors and expressed reluctance to see them punished. One even raised money for their legal defense. Psychiatrists, law enforcement, and media were stunned. The birth of a syndrome. The bizarre emotional bond between the hostages and their captors prompted a wave of psychological interest. The term Stockholm Syndrome was coined by criminologist and psychiatrist Nils Bejerot, who had assisted the police during the siege. Stockholm Syndrome is now used to describe a condition where hostages, or victims of abuse, develop positive feelings toward their captors or abusers. It's seen as a survival strategy under extreme stress, where identifying with an aggressor may provide a sense of safety. Legacy and impact. The Stockholm bank robbery wasn't particularly bloody or economically disastrous. But its psychological fallout has had a long-lasting impact on hostage negotiation tactics, trauma research, and popular culture. Olsson was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison. Olofsson, whose role was more ambiguous, was initially convicted but later had his sentence overturned. Afterward, he returned to a life of crime and spent much of his life in and out of prison. Meanwhile, the hostages lived with the lasting effects of an event that made them global psychological case studies. From movies and TV shows to political metaphors, Stockholm Syndrome has become part of everyday language. But its origin remains rooted in that surreal, 6-day standoff in a Swedish bank vault, where fear turned into empathy, and captives came to trust the very men who held them prisoner.